I'm your host, Daniel James II, and we're back at it again with Season 3 of the Culture Connect, the podcast for the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. Inspired by the vision of our Executive Director, Dr. Dolores DaCosta, we bring forward the voices of the forgotten, the stories of the unheard, and the realities of the marginalized in the Palmetto State. This season, you're going to hear from community organizers, business owners, nonprofit experts, tribal leaders, filmmakers, men and women, striving every day to make South Carolina a great place to live for all of its citizens. Be sure to follow us on all digital platforms so you don't miss the next episode of the Culture Connect. Listen, family, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I say this about every guest, but we have a very special guest today. Can you give the audience just a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so Jerry Blassingame, I am founder and CEO of Soteria Community Development Corporation. Okay. We're in Greenville, and we work with men and women who have been impacted by our criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. We've been doing this for 24 years. I created this organization while I was serving a 20-year prison sentence.
Goodness gracious. There's so much to unpack there now. 24, I'm 23, so you've been doing this work a long time, Pastor Jerry. I want to ask you real quick, because there's a whole story and even the name of your CDC. Talk about the name Soteria. What does that mean to you personally?
Yes, Soteria is the Greek word for salvation. Mm-hmm. In 1997, I was in Wateree Correctional Institution, South Carolina, serving my sentence, and I became a Christian while I was there and just doing Bible study. And me and a friend of mine were studying the word salvation, and I came across in the Greek Soteria, mm-hmm. and it just hit my heart. This is what I'm going to name my organization. Mm-hmm. He was like, organization? Like, yeah, when I get out, I'm going to start a nonprofit for people getting out of prison. And so that word not only means, we look at salvation as I'm going to heaven when I die, right? But it's healing, mm-hmm. health, saving, mm-hmm. Hope. These words that we're not taught in church what salvation means. And when I understood that, I'm like, this is what I need right now, and this is what I'm going to need when I get out, and people who have been incarcerated. So I pinned that name mm-hmm. for my organization.
I love it. And salvation was always supposed to be holistic, about addressing every part of the man, spirit, soul, and body. But often for that redemption to take place, there was something that, was broken. I want you to talk or go before even, the founding of Soteria, and go back to, little Jerry, and maybe talk a little bit about your upbringing and some of those formative experiences that shape who you are. Talk about that.
Most definitely. I want to go back real quick to salvation, then I'll start, because the trauma that happened to me as a kid, mm-hmm. no one came to me and told me that I had PTSD or I had problems, because at 5 years old, my mother was murdered in the next room. My brother and I were playing. I was 5. He was 7.5. Mm-hmm. And it was in January. My birthday was March. 2 months later, I was going to turn 6. My mother and I were planning a birthday party. Wow. And I heard her arguing with her boyfriend, and I stuck my eye to the keyhole to look in and see what was going on. And he said, "Boy, you better leave before you see something you don't want to see." So I jumped back from the door, as a 5-year-old would do, and didn't think anything about it. And 10 minutes later, we heard 2 shots. We all ran out of the house. And the next morning, I found out that my mother was murdered by this guy. He shot her twice in the temple. And I was devastated. First of all, my mother was dead, and I didn't get to have a birthday party. That's all I thought about, as a 5-year-old. And it was just, from there on, it was crazy, because the guy who killed my mother also shot my grandfather in the eye. Mm-hmm. My mother was a twin. Her twin died 4 years before her. So my family had these deaths all in a row. And my grandfather died 2 years after he was shot. And no one talked to us. The school system, the DSS system, no one. And we just had to do what we needed to do. And most of us turned to drinking, drugs, mm-hmm. promiscuity, all the things that you do in the inner city.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And what becomes all the more evident to me, I was reading your book in the car, and I was talking to Miss Sharice, our public information director, and I would be reading the part, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is so good." And then I have parts where I'm like, "God," I'm reading it, and something that dawned on me was the fact that, the system, the broken and honestly the sinful society that we have, often will tell people who have gone through, bad experiences, etc., that there's no hope.
Right.
And that sounds like that's a story almost of, even when I read Reclaimed, you were talking about your grandmother. Mm-hmm. That was sort of these successive deaths that happened. It led to hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And, and some people are just not even in a position to receive, salvation mm-hmm. when it really, that encounter comes, or when that opportunity opens itself, or that door for healing and hope and restoration happens. They're not even in a place to receive it. And that's what makes your work here so powerful. The other thing, you talked about a lot of the trauma as a child. And, we were also talking about in the car the fact that, like, you don't realize the impact that all these experiences can have on a child. Right. But they really do make you and shape you. And it is important to make sure that children have the right experiences, because mm-hmm. they see everything. You remember all of that so vividly.
Oh my God. And what I don't remember, my brother will correct me.
Yes, sir.
What I don't know. Mm-hmm. So, but one of the definitions for the word salvation is also deliverance.
I love that. Yes, sir.
And they need Jesus.
Yes, sir. It's the truth.
Without a doubt.
1000%. And that's what I love too about your story, was that you talk about the fact that sometimes we can ask or be in this dilemma of, what did I do to deserve this, or I didn't sow this, so why am I reaping this hardship? Right. But sometimes those are the greatest opportunities, sometimes just to be tested concerning who we are. Our character is a part of our development. It's part of a bigger plan that God has.
Almost definitely.
And often it's going to yield an eternal outcome. I want to talk about the fact that despite you being, traumatized by these early experiences, seeing your mother killed, grandmother spiral, and some of your support systems break down, you were immensely creative as a child growing up. Yes. And you ultimately went to Greenville Tech to pursue an architectural, licensing or degree. Talk about that creativity, that love for reading. We were talking about that. Mm-hmm. You had, the saving grace was that you ended up in a school in Greenville that was a little bit more, wealthier, had more resources. Talk about that how that creativity, because you also mentioned in your book that a lot of traumatized kids also tend to be very creative. Mm-hmm. So talk about that creativity.
Yeah. And so I learned about that as an adult. I had a peer mentor who was a licensed social worker. Uh-huh. And he told me, he was like, "You need that PTSD as a child." I'm like, "Yeah, but I never got, diagnosed with it." Mm-hmm. And we talked about the creativity, because sometimes you can go off the Richter and go the other way. Mm-hmm. Mine caused me to be creative.
Yes, sir.
And love drawing and reading. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we moved to Lower Water Apartments from West Greenville when my mother was murdered, and I was in the first grade, and it was during October. Mm-hmm. And we were drawing pictures for Halloween. Mm-hmm. And I remember my picture being the best picture in the class, mm-hmm. because I drew within. I would go into myself and spend a lot of time alone, and I would think a lot. And so that caused me I love colors, and I love numbers, and I love words. And so I just excelled, and my teachers saw something in me. Mm-hmm. They knew I was poor, probably by the way I was dressed and having a nappy head, because I probably ain't gonna get a haircut. I'm just being real. And so they cared a little more about me because I tried. And I remember my teachers always just giving me more time. And one thing about me too is I had a really bad stuttering problem. I could hardly talk, and I would get picked on all the time. And so that was one of the things I knew my teachers just kind of brought me in just to kind of encourage me. And every day I would get picked on for not being able to pronounce words and just stammering and stuttering. And, they would just help me and push me along. And so instead of me talking, I would read. That's why I learned to read and love to read, because I didn't like to talk. So I would just read. Mm-hmm. And I would get home from school and go off in the woods and just walk and talk to somebody who I know now was God.
That's right.
Just talking to myself, and God was listening.
That's right.
And so my teachers really loved me, and I was able to go to Mitchell Elementary School, which was on the east side of town, which was in the very middle of the upper class side of town. We were bused. This is when busing first started in 73. Okay. And so they would bus us about 25 minutes. And we'd have to get up at dark 30 to wait for the bus.
What's dark 30?
The sun wasn't even up.
The sun wasn't up. Okay. Okay.
We would stand out in the dark to catch the bus and ride long rides. But it was a really good school. Mm-hmm. And I know God had to be able to place me in that school, because if I had went to one of the inner city schools, I would probably not be here today.
Yes.
Because there was not a lot of resources in some of the inner city schools like there was out on the east side of town.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Having someone that was willing to take time with you to learn how to hone that creative aspect of who you were, like that's all seems to have been very influential in your life.
Yeah.
So now you end up but you're battling two realities, right? Because you're going to school in a wealthy part of town, but I'm
living in the inner city neighborhood. Yes. And by the time I was in middle school, I was hooked on pornography.
Yeah.
Probably drinking, and probably smoked my first joint around that time as well, because it was in my house in an ashtray. As little kids, you mimic what you see.
That's right.
So all of us as little boys would steal a beer and run outside and drink it and laugh and go get roaches out of the ashtray and roll them up and smoke them like we're doing something. But I would still go to school, make A's and B's, had perfect attendance. And at this time we were walking to school, and I loved school. I was in love with school. My teachers were in love with me. And by the time I got to the middle school in the 7th grade, my 7th grade English teacher sent me to speech therapy. She called in the school district speech therapist and made them work with me. And I fell in love with woodworking at the same time. I just love woodworking. And it was during my woodworking class that I had to go to speech therapy twice a week. I was so mad, but I'm glad my teacher thought enough about me to put me in speech therapy, because I pastored. I speak every Sunday.
Yes, right.
I speak across the world, the nation. Right. I've spoken in front of Congress. I've spoken in front of the State House. So I'm a pretty good speaker now, and I owe it to my 7th grade teacher, Miss Long and Miss Goebel. I know their names because they impacted my life.
Are they still with us?
I think both of them have passed away, but they have daughters.
Okay.
And my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Rish, who I talked about in my book, is the one who helped me and gave me a love for reading. She passed away, but I was able to meet her daughter. Her daughter read my book and saw her mother's name in my book. Yeah,
I know that was precious.
Yeah, that was
precious. So you have this double life almost that you're having to live, even as a young person. It's like you have the studious and the creative and the, almost like that's the real you.
Yeah.
But you have the you that's operating also out of this brokenness, also just a product of the environment that you were in that's trying to shroud out the real you that God wants to bring forward.
Yes.
Now one day you end up being the integral and whole man that you are today, but it took some time. Talk about how this double life almost, you come to this fork in the road while you have full scholarship to Greenville Tech. Mm-hmm. You end up being this great student there, but you have a fork in the road. Talk about that.
So, as a 18, 19-year-old kid in the inner city in the 80s, late 80s, rap music, crack, hit our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And everybody was balling.
Yes.
All my friends were wearing Jordans back then, the real Jordans when they first came out, wearing Jordans and gold chains and driving nice cars. And I'm living off my mother's Social Security check, my death benefit check. And some of that was going to my grandmother to help pay bills and buy food. And so I was barely getting along. She used to give me some money to buy clothes. I was like, Grandma, I got to have clothes. I need shoes. I'm going to school. And one day, one of my buddies invited me downtown where they were selling drugs and say, look, you don't have to sell anything. You just watch for the police. We'll give you $50 a day for like 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And then they raised me to $100 a day. And so I'm making $100 a day for a couple hours. I would leave school, go down on the block, watch for the police. If I see the police, I would just say, raise up. Police are coming. That was it.
So 2 words.
Yeah.
Okay.
And raise up. That's it. And, we, shoot dice on the corner and, smoke weed and drink beer. And while we watch for the police and stuff, and money started getting good. And next thing you know, I'm riding around with one of the biggest drug dealers. He's showing me around town. I'm going to school every day, getting off school. Now I'm learning how to make freebase, cooking crack, bagging crack, in delivering crack to every neighborhood in Greenville. I got my polo shirt on and khaki pants and Sebagos. Nobody knew who I'm like a studious kid.
Yeah.
And so nobody knew what I was doing, but I started making a lot of money. And the guy who was like over me, the head guy, he started smoking crack. His boss brought me a big bag of cocaine one day. And he was like, you take this, so-and-so and so-and-so is gone. You know the whole routine. You can do this. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay. Mm-hmm. And so I go buy me a BMW like everybody else. And I start, selling dope. And I was trying to stay in school. I got home from school one day and the guy who was selling dope for me gave me $20,000 in cash money. Now that wasn't, that wasn't money that I had to give back. That was profit. Mm-hmm. That I made in one day. Mm-hmm. You think I went back to school? No. An architect could make $20,000 in one day. And from then on, I was trying to go back, but it was hard to go sit in class, knowing that this amount of money, was out there in the street. And so that the streets pulled me from school. So after 2 years, and I, right before I could have graduated, I just left school and started, selling. And the first time I got arrested, I got 15 years suspended to 9 months. And I told the judge I was going to go back to school, but I didn't.
Golly. And see, that's the thing. $20,000. How much is it a year? That's the millions. Gotta be, right?
Oh, back then money was like, it was plentiful in the street.
Golly. So you have the skills to really make a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but it's just, being misdirected toward the wrong thing. So it's not that, and that's what I want, our audience to understand is that, there's a sense that people that are incarcerated or even that are wound up in drug culture or drug life, there's a lack of skills. Mm-hmm. That's not true.
No, it's
good God.
Even the lowest person on the totem pole has skills.
That's right.
I had 11 or 12 people working for me.
Management.
Yes. I had people bagging up. Yeah. I had people marketing. I had testers, people smoking to see how I smoke. Yes. I just had people counting money for me. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
And so I had a flourishing business and I had to manage all these people. I had transporters, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I had to manage all these people. So I was an entrepreneur and I learned, from the street. Yes, I don't have an MBA from a college, but I learned how to run a business in the street. And it was a very lucrative business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now there's a huge backstory to your first arrest and then the first time that you end up, which was not even on a drug charge. It was on something else. But then you have your first arrest that leads to your first 4-month prison sentence. That's a whole story. If you want to read that, go to Reclaimed. Yeah. It's an interesting story. But, you end up going to prison for those couple months. You get back out mm-hmm. and you end up right back doing what you were doing.
Yes.
We call that recidivism.
Recidivism, yes.
Talk about that experience, why the rationale of going back to dealing with drugs, because I think sometimes there's, again, a misconception that someone who commits a crime or a series of crimes wants to continue in criminality, and it's like that's not necessarily true either. No. So talk about that.
Yeah. So the data says that 60% of people who get out of prison won't find a job within the first year. Yeah. Why? Because of the criminal background, and because there are 44,000 collateral consequences that bar people with a criminal background forever climbing the economic mobility ladder. Mm. 44,000. That's national. There are 7,000 collateral consequences in the state of South Carolina. Things like fines and fees and housing and jobs, mm-hmm. Up until a little, a while ago, certain certifications and occupational licenses. We just got a bill passed. But for me, I had a drug charge. So the Clinton crime bill said that if you have a drug charge, you couldn't get a Pell Grant. I was in school on a Pell Grant. I wanted to go back to school to finish my degree, but my Pell Grant was gone. I didn't have money, to do that. I had just got out, couldn't find a job. So what did I do? Mm-hmm. The boys on the block, they're waiting for me.
That's right.
And so somebody would give me a package before they would give me a job, And so that was what I went back to. And 6 months later, I got caught again.
And this time it's for a longer sentence. So, what's going through your mind when they say 20 years or however it happened,
Yeah. Well, I had 2 small kids. I had my first wife I had a family that I was running the streets. I can say I cared, but I was just wrapped up in it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sitting in a county jail facing 20 years. I was out for a while. They revoked my bond. And I'm sitting here like my life is over. Yeah. I'm 27 years old, sitting in prison waiting for a 20-year sentence. And I'm like, I'm finished. At the time, I did not know God. Yeah. I did not want to know God. Yeah. Barely believed in God. I knew he existed from, the church sermons I've heard of Bible studies, but he wasn't doing anything for me. Mm-hmm. I was my own God. I was the one who could get on the plane and go anywhere I wanted to go. That's right. Jamaica, Las Vegas, Bahamas, whenever, without even 30-day notice. I could just say, let's go to Bahamas tonight. And we go tomorrow, So I was my own God. And so I'm sitting in the prison cell, like, what am I going to do? Yeah. My oldest sister, who was she was a teenager when my mother passed, but she was hooked on heroin as a teenager. Mm-hmm. And she became a Christian. And she had me in the right place at the right time because she was talking to me about her God, who I didn't want to believe in, but she was the only person that would accept my collect phone call from jail. And when I called her, guess who she would talk about?
Jesus.
Her Jesus. Yeah. I'm like, Bert, I don't want to hear about Jesus. Can we just talk about something else? And she would always tell me what her pastor preached Sunday. Yeah. And always send me letters with scriptures in them. And it broke me down. Yes, sir. I remember one day I was on the block. I'll never forget it. I was selling drugs and she brought out a Just Say No to Drug campaign to my neighborhood.
Under Reagan. It was Nancy Reagan. Right?
Under Nancy Reagan. Yeah. And I was so mad because it stopped my operation for a couple hours. All the kids had their Just Say No to Drug shirts on. They was marching the block. And she came up to me and looked me in my eyes. She said, what are you doing out here? Yeah. You know you're better than this. Our mother would not be proud of you. And she shook her finger in my face. You're going to be a preacher one day. God got a call on your life. And walked away.
Oh, wow.
And in the county jail, she would often tell me about that. She said, God got a hold of you and you're not going to be free until you give Jesus your heart.
And powerful is prophetic. That's a prophetic.
Exactly.
Moment.
It's a prophetic.
And you talk about in your book about the constant need to be needed. Mm-hmm. But what you didn't know was that this Jesus she was preaching you about was the only one that could fill that void. And that actually, while you thought the streets needed you, the Lord had needed you, to cause other people to be free, a community, state, nation, and even the world to be free is quite powerful. I also love when you talked about the stuttering problem, because we know of another deliverer that had a stuttering problem as well. It's quite powerful how now you're used in your words to free other people as well. Mm-hmm. Now your sister, was one of the people you said ministered to you. Talk about, before we get to Soteria, the Community Development Corporation, let's talk about what happens in prison, because you say you were, after your sister ministered to you, you had someone else minister the gospel to you, and you figure, well, I'll just try God, see if I get out. Mm-hmm. And then, but there was a switch that happened where it went from, performative faith to genuine faith. Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
Yeah. So after my sister kind of threw the seed out,
yes, the seed.
She dropped the seed, and this other guy came and watered. I was standing in the cell door one day, and I heard somebody come by. Anybody want to talk to a preacher? And I just got louder and louder and louder. And this guy came and I asked him, could I have a Bible? Because my sister had been telling me to read the Bible. I didn't have one. He was like, yeah, I'm a Gideon. And if you let me share the gospel with you, I'll give you a Bible. And so he shared the gospel with me. And I reluctantly said the prayer. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going to trick God. That's what I said. I'm saying, I'm going to say this prayer. He's going to let me out and I'm going to go out and make this money. That was me. And so I said the prayer. He gave me the Bible. I started reading the Bible. And one day we were in the cell having a Bible study. And I said, the Bible is stupid. Threw it. Because I was reading the feeding of the 5,000. I had read it 4 times. The feeding of the 5,000 is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I'm like, why does the Bible keep repeating itself? And as soon as I said that, this guy walks in the cell. He was like, what are y'all doing? And I said, the Bible is stupid. It keep repeating itself. And he was like, here, let me explain. So this guy sits me down for like 7 to 10 days. I can't remember what. It was a short amount of time. And we would have a Bible study every day. And he took me to the Beatitudes. And he started teaching me about faith, prayer, fasting, how to identify false prophets. He wrote these scriptures down, and all of a sudden he was gone. This guy was a pastor who had got locked up for contempt of court, who had came in from one of his parishioners from child support or whatever, family court. And God sent him for me. I know without a shadow of a doubt. And man, this guy is still friends to this day. God sent him to me because that was part of the discipleship that I needed to get me over the hump, to feel good about who I was and who God was. And I think what we lack today in the church is discipleship. Somebody to just kind of walk us through. But that kind of put me to the place that when I got into the prison system, I knew what to go look for. And the first person I found when I got to the prison system was a chaplain.
Wow.
And asked him what type of Bible studies were in the prison where I could go and keep learning. I was hungry again to learn.
Mm-hmm. Now, somewhere along the line, you end up getting a full Bible because you started with just a getting New Testament. Then you get a full Bible. Right?
I got a full Bible, and I read the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And this was before I got a sentence. And my sister had told me to fast with her. And when I read that story of those Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace, in the one script I'll paraphrase, it says that our God is able to deliver us from this fiery furnace. And when I read that, it hit my heart. And I said, if God can deliver them, he can deliver me. And my faith was getting big, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. And if you don't read the word of God, your faith is not going to grow. You can talk all you want. You got to get some word in your heart. And so I was smart. I could read and understand it in my mind. But when my spirit was quickened, that's when I really started to grow. And I even shared that story with the judge, at my trial. And they laughed at me. But my lawyer had negotiated a 30-year sentence if I pled guilty. But the judge only sentenced me to 20 years. That was unscripted. The judge did it on his own because of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to say that because the judge, was prepared to give me 30 years. But by the time I told him the story and what was going on and that I was going to change my life while I was in prison, that I told him I was guilty. I was guilty. And so I ended up getting sentenced to 20 years, going into the prison system. I feel like that was the first miracle God did in my life of many. Was that I was going to plead to 30, end up having to only plead to 20. And I had a trafficking charge, which was violent. So if I would have got 30 years violent, I would have did 28 years.
Now, I'm going to encourage the audience once again, please reclaim, because we're rushing through a lot. Because alongside this story is also story of, how you ended up meeting your wife and all these types of things as well. Right. But when you talk about this in the book, how you came to a point where you were like, you know what? After you read that story in the book of Daniel, you said, you know what? If I'm in here for 20 years, I'm going to do it with God. Mm-hmm. If I do 30, I know God's still going to deliver me out of this some way, or at least deliver me in it. Right. And that was then when the breakthrough came for you to get this, review and end up getting, expedited parole. Talk about that, because some of us don't know how those processes work. You have this post-conviction release, right, and then a parole process. Talk about that.
So yeah, I was in, doing my sentence, and as I grew with God, I got not comfortable, but I got content with being with God. Yeah, like Paul said, I know how to be abound, I know how to be abased. That's right. And I made a lot of money when I was selling drugs, and when I was with Christ, I lived a very humble life in prison. But I was so content in who I was. If I'd had to do the whole 20, I'm good. But at the same time, I'm like, well, Lord, if there's an out, you got a lot of jailhouse lawyers, and they're always filing paperwork, and some of them are really good. So this one guy, he asked to see my case, and although I pled guilty, there were some flaws in my case, a lot of flaws. And so I was like, okay, you can do the post conviction, and he was like, you got 20 years, man, you're 27 years old, you can get out. So he filed the post conviction. Read it to me. He showed me where all the flaws, a lot of flaws, ineffective assistance of counsel and all this stuff. And so he was like, now we'll send it in, and they have to appoint you an attorney to represent you at your PCR hearing. So during this whole time I was praying, I'm getting stronger in the Lord.
Wow.
I'm getting stronger in the Lord every day. I'm doing Bible studies every day. I'm getting up at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm journaling. Habakkuk 2 says, write the vision down and make it plain so that those who read it may run with you. And I'm writing. And I had a post-conviction hearing. I had paid like a couple $1,000s for my transcript, had to do all that. And I had a dream one night. The night before my post-conviction hearing, I had a dream. I'm not sure if I talk about the dream in my book or not, but I had a dream.
Yes, you did.
I had a dream that I was on the way to a cafeteria and like doing lunch and dinner time. That's the most important part of the prison yard because you're going to eat.
That's right.
And so there was this long line of people, and there are lines everywhere. This long line. And this was the longest line I've ever seen in a dream. And I was standing back in this long line. I'm like, God, there's a lot of people in the cafeteria line today. I'm like, God almighty. I'm like, all these people. I'm like, how am I going to get to eat? And all of a sudden, this big door closed. As far as I can see, up, down, to the left, and to the right, and it just closed. Doof. I heard it loud. And I was like, Lord, I'm not going to get to eat. Why wasn't I standing in the line? And the Lord spoke to me in the dream and said, those are all the people who are going to hell if you don't do what I've called you to do. And I woke up in a cold sweat. And I'm thinking, what is this about? And so I began to pray and think. And I thought about, I'm going to post-conviction hearing tomorrow. I'm guilty. I can't go and tell a lie. Yeah. I'm like, I'm guilty. I'm not ready yet. So I'm wrestling with this. So on the way to they picked me up, officer. I'm in Watery, way down in Sumter, South Carolina, and I'm driving from Sumter to Greenville to the Greenville County Court. So when I get to the court, I was supposed to meet my lawyer, Lawrence Crane. So the whole way up, me and God having a conversation, and I'm like, I'm literally blacking out with this conversation with God. I get to the courthouse. Mr. Crane meets me. He's talking about what we're gonna do, and I'm like, oblivious. I'm like, yes, sir. No, sir. Yes. I'm just talking. And I get to the holding cell and it's like I blank out. I remember getting on the stand and I remember them asking me and I remember saying, I'm guilty. And I don't remember anything else till I get back to the holding cell. And I remember Mr. Crane fussing at me, asking me why I waste his time, why I waste the state's time and people paid money and all this right here. And I'm like, what? And he was like, they denied your PCR hearing. I thought we had a plan. I'm like, I just told him, I'm like, I'm guilty. And he just kind of walked away mad, but I didn't get my PCR hearing. I could have got out in 18 months, but I didn't. And I believe that was one of the turning points in my life because I stayed in the prison system and I went deep in God. Yeah. I remember being filled with the Holy Spirit. And, I didn't believe in speaking in tongues. Yeah. And I remember I got filled with the Holy Spirit. I spoke in tongues in the shower, didn't even ask God to fill me. Yeah. I remember praying and waking up. I could hear thunder and lightning. I'm like, it was crazy. People probably think I'm crazy, but, yes, there was so many things happening. And, I was praying for guys and I began, I got shipped from Watery at that time. I had a 20-year sentence. I was at Watery on the trash pickup crew. I was a flight risk. They shipped me in 18 months to a county jail where I was the cook in Abbeville. Yeah. 20-year sentence and working at a county jail. I know I'm getting ahead, but this is some of the things that God began to show me that he was real by these miracles and signs and wonders that he was doing in my life and showing me I'm God. I'm in control. You just hold on.
Yes, sir. Now I want to put a nice bow on that part so we can move on to release and then move on from personal soteria to the soteria, the CDC. I think one of the things when I was reading your book, I realized that the circumstances of that situation, you being obedient to God in that scenario, was really because he was setting up circumstances so that your testimony could be that no one delivered you out of that situation but God, because you had an easy way out.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the other side of that, I will say, just for those watching, yes, the Lord was gracious to his child in this scenario and in so many scenarios. But the post-conviction relief, the reason it was an opportunity you thought you had was because there was a due process issue, right, in your case?
Yeah.
So due process is the law. And so they should process you fairly, even if you did do a crime.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have a tendency, to, and so I don't want to make an excuse, but I do want to say that, God was the sovereign in your situation.
Yes.
And that's what was beautiful about your story, but also it shows there is the due process issue is a flaw in the system, because what if you hadn't had the mind to even think about that? I don't know.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So that's one thing I want to say. And then now, so you talk about going to Abbeville. You being driven around town by this jailer. You have privileges. I think this is when you start your ministry, right? Talk about the inception of your ministry there. And you get a letter one day. Yeah. And it
most definitely. So when I got the Abbeville County Prison, I told the chaplain there that I was called to preach and that I wanted to be a minister, and also I wanted to start a nonprofit. And so he was like, well, maybe we can have you preaching every first Sunday. So I was I don't like to use this word, but that's what they call me, the inmate preacher. Every first Sunday I would preach. I would study all week, and a group from Clemson United Methodist Church who had been pen paling me several years prior paid my way through CIU, Columbia International University, to study the Bible. And I was taking courses. And, I'm being who God has called me to be. People come into the jail. I'm giving them a Bible. I'm praying with them. I'm leading people to Christ. I had got to the place where I would write in my journal and I would write their names in red because I'm counting how many people I get saved. That's the young stuff. But God said, but the ministry was growing. I'm writing people and just encouraging people. And, I got there in 97 and 98. I get a letter from the parole board saying that I'm going up for parole. Well, it's in 99. And 99, I'm getting in January, I think it was. I got a letter, so I'm going up for parole. And people are like, what? Going up for parole? You only did 3.5 years. This must be a mistake. I'm like, no, it's not a mistake. I've been praying. And, I was believing. Months prior to that, I started sending stuff home. God spoke to me and told me it was time. And I started sending stuff home, books and extra clothes. Faith. And toward like December, I got my address changed. And they're like, are you getting ready to escape? Seriously. But the Bible says that it is impossible to please him without faith. So I was acting. I was doing things, and God said, okay, you ready? And I get a letter saying I'm going up for parole the next month. And nobody thought I was going to make it. We were wearing prison uniform. And when I went up for the parole board, I had on a white button-down shirt, slacks, shoes. And they asked me, where are you? Where are you housed? And I said, I'm housed at Abbeville County Prison. And I told them what I was doing, explained to them, my desire to do ministry when I got out. And I got paroled. Now, if anybody know anything about the South Carolina parole system, when you get paroled, you might sit in there 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, 3 days. I went to parole on Wednesday. I got released on Friday. Beautiful. And I found a church service that Friday night that I went to.
You praised him all night.
I praised him all night long. I wanted to show him that I appreciate him. And I haven't stopped. Because you can't fabricate that.
Yes.
And so, he was just so good. And when I got out, I hit the ground running, with, a couple 100 handwritten notes of the ministry that I was going to produce.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now you have you were set up with a couple of jobs when you first got out, but talk about that turning point where you realized, goodness gracious, people like in my predicament coming out of prison, they don't have many opportunities. Now I find myself in the same place, but I want to shift it because you were doing somebody's yard and it clicked and said, the Lord said, it's time. Yeah. Talk about that.
I was actually working with a geotechnical engineering firm.
Okay.
Doing soil samplings.
Okay.
The first job I got, my brother got me a job working for a moving and storage company that lasted about 2 weeks. Okay. Then I ended up working with a lady who was doing water gardens, and I got a job in a warehouse. I worked that job for a while. I went back to school, tried to get my degree again, and it didn't work out. I couldn't, get any funding.
Say why.
because of my criminal conviction.
Okay.
I couldn't get Pell Grant. And I was almost finished. And then I got an internship with a geotechnical engineering firm out of Columbia. They had an office in Simpsonville. And my boss really loved me. And he said, Jerry, I'm going to go check and see if we can, get you licensed as an architect just to see what happens. And found out that because back then I couldn't get occupational license because of my criminal conviction. And so I was just so frustrated. I had started Soteria part-time, doing, a little bit here and a little bit there. I think we had might have had a transitional house open, just doing whatever I can with the little money we had.
Yeah. And
I remember out doing a soil sample. We were building a subdivision and I was sampling soil, burning off the moisture from soil. And I'm just praying. I'm always praying when I'm working, and heard the Lord say it's time. Now, I wasn't making a lot of money. I had, a couple kids and I had moved to Abbeville. We were going back and forth from Abbeville to Greenville at the time. And I walked off my job and gave my 2 weeks notice because God said it's time.
Yeah.
And with no paycheck, nothing. And started Soteria and got with churches, got with people in the community. And, people like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure you hadn't been out of prison but a couple of years? Are you sure God told you? I'm like, yeah, I know God told me to do it. But he provided. That's right. God provided. I would call people all over the U.S. and ask them how to do this. Back then it was called prison aftercare. It wasn't reentry. Reentry wasn't even a word yet. Mm-hmm. And so I just started calling around. And I remember calling a guy who's one of my good friends now in Detroit. He had a conference up in Detroit. He gave me a scholarship to come up there to the very first conference that he did. And I learned a lot, and I would go every year to bring resources back to South Carolina. We opened up one house, and we opened up 2 transitional houses. And then we had 4 transitional houses.
About a whole street then.
Yeah. And it was just amazing what God was doing through the obedience.
I love it. Obedience is better. It really is. Yes. It is. And the only reason I asked you to clarify why is because, there are lots of occupations that people with a criminal past cannot, do or disbarred from, despite having the skills, the ability, the need for that type of opportunity. And they just refuse that for whatever miscellaneous reason, et cetera. So that's something also that I feel like should be reconsidered, and that has to be reconsidered when we think about criminal justice reform in the state and think for things like that. So that's the only reason I asked. So you're still doing ministry at this time. You still preaching at Abbeville? Yeah,
I was. We eventually moved back to Greenville.
Okay.
And I was doing Bible study for the jail.
Okay.
And kind of got tired, and we moved back to Greenville.
Okay.
And we joined a big church here, and I got on staff at the church. And that's when I moved my Soteria office to the church.
Okay.
And built a little small staff, and the church kind of propped us up for a few years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you end up, from my understanding, operating 2 CDCs at once.
Yeah.
Theirs and yours.
Yep.
How did that happen? And then how did you end up deciding, it's better if we just come under one umbrella, and you end up, sort of consolidating?
Yeah. So this is a great story too. So the church found out that I was running Soteria Community Development Corporation. Okay. And no one at the time knew a whole lot about CDC. Bernie Mazik, who is the state CDC.
What is a CDC?
It's a Community Development Corporation.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit that does community-based work.
Okay.
Meaning that we don't go into a community saying this is what we're going to do. The community members are stakeholders.
Beautiful.
Board members, leaders, and they get to decide what goes on in their community.
As it relates to building wealth, right?
Building wealth, housing, business, workforce development, and things like that.
Awesome.
And so the church found out that I was doing CDC work. They wanted to start a CDC. So they called me to a meeting. I was a member of the church. And they called me in, and they were like, can you show us how to do a CDC? We have one, but it's dormant. I'm like, sure. So I'm getting to talking. They already knew about me. So halfway through the interview or the meeting, they were like, you want a job? I'm like, I didn't come here for a job. And at the time, I wasn't making any money. Like I was getting my power turned off on a regular basis, to be honest. Seriously, I was doing work and I'm young, just got out of, prison, not making it, couldn't get anything. So I'm making it work. I'm building houses, mailboxes, painting. And so I left out of there like, I didn't come for a job. I have a job. And so I went home and thought about it and came back. I'm like, I think I need that job. So I took the position and they were like, look, you build our CDC. You can bring your CDC here. We'll give you an office. We'll give you a couple staff people and you can run both out of one. I'm like, cool. And so we built that CDC while I was doing Soteria. I had 2 boards. And one day I was like, I can't do this. And so I said, why don't we merge these CDCs? They were like, merge? I'm like, well, banks merge all the time. So that's the type of person I am. People have told me I was like a MacGyver. I can fix anything. I can do anything. And I think like that. There's nothing I can't do and nothing I won't do. And I'm like, well, this is too much for me. Let's merge the boards and make them one CDC. We're already doing, housing and financial literacy. Everything we were doing was the same. So the church agreed to merge. We merged our CDCs. We kept the 501c3 number of Soteria. Awesome. And dissolved the other one, merged the board. So we just continue to do what we do. So we had, we were doing low income housing. We were still doing transitional housing. I had the first IDA program in the upstate, which is individual development account, which is a 3-to-1 matching savings program for low income people. I use that for people who are getting out of prison. I say people getting out of prison are low income too. So let's use IDAs for people who are getting out of prison. So we had financial literacy classes, taught people how to balance budget, credit repair. And so you can only use the money for asset development, buy a home, go back to school or start a business. Mm-hmm. So we had people back then in the early 2000s who were getting out of prison, buying homes and starting businesses with IDA money. That's what community development is all about. And so our program just grew. And we grew that for years. And so there are a lot of firsts that we did, being a community development corporation. And I've always, believed in wealth building. I had to create a job for myself. I've had Soteria since 1999 and as part-time, then it got into full-time, but it's the only real job I've had since I got out of prison. I've had some jobs, but this has been something I've held to for 24 years.
And this is a full-time job. So I love it. I do want to say that as someone that's from the PD region of South Carolina, when I hear a CDC, I'm like, goodness, we need that so desperately because believe it or not, we have incarcerated populations, people there that they don't have a CDC with social enterprises like you that could help them sort of come out of homelessness or that's the thing. The cycles of poverty, incarceration, and homelessness are very interconnected, and education as well. So we definitely need that across the state, not just here. So I'm hoping that community development model is something I see expand, or either Soteria expand throughout the state, or we get other CDCs up and running because it's definitely needed. I do want to, so you have the consolidated CDC at this point. Mm-hmm. Now, there was an instance that happened where you ended up basically starting businesses through the Community Development Corporation. So you have, recycling, different things. Talk about those businesses that you started and how that served those formerly incarcerated folks you were.
Yeah, most helping. Definitely. So actually we had landscaping and some other things prior to the economic downturn, 2007, 2008. Right. So during that time, nobody would hire any of our participants in our program because people with college degrees couldn't even get a job then. Yeah. And so I'm taking a shower one day, minding my own business. And the Lord speaks to me and says, start a recycling business. Like, what? Start a recycling business? I get to my office. I get an email from somebody saying, check out this organization in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, that's doing recycling, teaching people who were formerly on drugs, about recycling. I'm like, what? So I called this organization, told them who I am and where I'm from. I'm like, can I come and see what y'all are doing? 2 weeks later, I was on a plane in Chicago on the south side. I spent 3 days. They taught me about recycling, the different types of recycling. And, they were not really getting a lot of money from it. They were just doing a service. And I came back with a business idea that we could start a recycling business, because I had studied recycling by this time. And I told one of my board members, and we called the school district of Greenville County to see if they needed any recycling services. Well, because of the economic downturn, the company who was doing their recycling pulled out. And we were like, we'll do it. They were like, we can't pay you. We'll give you the material. I'm like, okay, dumb, stupid me, I thought. I'm like, okay. I said, okay to everything. And so we had a box truck that somebody donated our organization, 16-foot box truck. And so we used the box truck to collect paper, plastic, cardboard, and aluminum by hand. And we bought some bins, got a $15,000 grant to start this business from the state CDC association. And we started this business. The school district gave us a 5-year contract to collect their recycling. And we would go sell the recycling every other day. And we made our money by selling the recycling, and we were able to pay the guys and ladies something. So we created our own social enterprise. And back then, I don't think nonprofits was kind of doing it the way we're doing it. Everybody thought, like, what are y'all doing? To the point that the school district called me one day and they were like, thank you. I'm like, for what? They were like, you save us $125,000 a year. And we haven't had any contractors come on our property that didn't give us trouble. And we know who y'all are and what y'all are doing. We've never had a problem from your organization. And we know you got people who've been in prison. Thank you so much. And that kind of made my day. And I'm like, what else can we do? That business ran for, 6 or 7 years. And when that business tanked, we started our reclaimed wood business, Soteria at Work, which is what we're doing now.
And and these are social enterprises, right?
Yes.
You call them. So tell us exactly what that constitutes, and how many of those types of businesses do you have operating out of Soteria now?
So we have a couple now, but social enterprise is a business that a not-for-profit starts, because the money don't go in somebody's pocket, it goes back into the organization.
Yes, sir.
And, it's social enterprise, exactly what it is, because it's for social good. It's workforce development, it's job training, and it's creating a revenue stream for the organizations, making the organization sustainable.
Okay. Guys.
Yeah. And so right now we have we do have rental properties, but right now we're operating our Soteria at Work, woodworking business. We have 2. We have a deconstruction company where we teach men how to tear houses down by hand, and we take the wood and, we can sell it. We do salvage, architectural salvage, like old windows and doors and fireplace mantles and things like that. Then we have our Soteria at Work reclaimed wood business that build furniture, like the wood wall that's behind you. We do stuff like that in houses and buildings. We do barn doors. We do farm tables. We make cornhole games. On our website, you can just see a plethora of just, artifacts and furniture that we've made, that we teach men who've never been in a wood shop how to take wood, an old, ugly piece of wood, plane it, join it, put it on a saw, and make it something beautiful. And one day, one of the guys were like, this is what y'all are doing to us. Y'all are taking us, old, broken down, and sanding us and making us new and making us good. So it's been really good for us to see that business flourish and to see the men and women come into our program and understand what Soteria is all about.
That's right.
Yeah.
And and what that tells me too is, when you talked about taking what was damaged and repairing it to make something beautiful, is that it always had value. It just needed to be repurposed.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's the beautiful about us as well. We serve a God of second chances, and we were created with innate value, but because of our fallen and our broken nature, we needed salvation to be saved, to be put back in our original purpose was to give God glory.
Right.
Our lives to be an extension of God's glory. And so that is the gospel. That is the story of redemption.
Yes.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's the story of Soteria. That's what
right.
we do. And, we have to do good. I always tell guys and ladies when they come to our program, I'm like, you're at Soteria. You're in salvation.
That's right.
You're covered. And that's what, and I think they see it, especially when they go into the wood shop and see things that we do and see some of the old buildings, because we always buy dilapidated buildings.
That's right.
And we fix them up. Actually, our wood shop burned down last year. And the building we just purchased is an old building, 60 or 70 years old building. And everybody's like, why are you buying an old building? Because we're going to fix it up and we're going to make it new again, you know? And I love taking old things, making them new, because that's what he does. You know, there's value in everything.
That's right.
Value in everything. Sometimes we just can't see it.
Mm-hmm. If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. New creature.
That's right.
I love that so much. And I love how your story just, you know, the picture is just so full, and it's just something in my eyes. Again, I'm going to say it for the third time, one more time. Lifetime story. You really do, Pastor Jerry. You have one that's worth telling. So now, move us forward. So now we're past the recession. You have these businesses, etc. So the developments. Talk about the housing developments real quick. Cover what does Soteria have now, and what's Soteria operating with today, post-pandemic, all those things.
Yeah, most definitely. So we have an acronym here: housing, employment, education, advocacy, and affirmation. Those are the things that we do. Those are the legs, the pillars that we stand on. And so we have 18 low-income houses, residences, that where people live, either graduate from our program or families who've been impacted by the criminal justice system can live. And so when a person graduates from our program, they're able to put in an application for a place that they know they have to worry about putting it. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Mm-hmm. You know? And so, you know, that's our housing portion. We also own and operate 2 16-bed transitional housing facilities. For men, one for men and one for women, where a person can get out of prison with nothing, mm-hmm. and they can stay up to 1 year. Mm-hmm. When the first day they come, we give them what we call a first day kit. It's got underwear, socks, all the toiletries, anything they need. We take them to the DMV to get their ID, a driver's license, social security card, vital records to get their birth certificate. Yeah. We take them to the bank, get them a bank account opened up. And as soon as they get a job, it gets funded. We enroll them in our matching savings program. We get them a mentor that will walk with them for the duration of their program, which is a year. So we try to give them all the tools they need so that they can be successful. Mm-hmm. They get 3 meals a day. We get them a ride wherever they need to go, back and forth to work, probation, to the doctor. We have a dentist that we work with, that people who lost teeth through the drug use, we make sure that they can smile again. So we have a lot of services. We also partner with a lot of the resources in Greenville. So we make sure that a person can feel good about themselves and that they can be productive. And, you know, the first 30 days, that's what they're doing. We don't charge them anything until they're working. So everything up until they can get employed is free. Once they get employed, we charge them $150 a week, and it covers all of that. Advocacy. We work on legislation all the time. In 2018, I helped pass the first felony expungement legislation in South Carolina. I worked 13 years to help get that bill passed. Also worked on some ban-the-box ordinances in the city of Greenville. That's right. You know, all of the affirmation, the mentoring, the classes. You know, we have classes every night, you know, for our guys and ladies. They work during the day. They have classes at night. So our life skill classes, mm-hmm. financial literacy, health and wellness, mm-hmm. Bible studies, all these things that the men and women do at night. Awesome. We also run our social enterprises. I mentioned our Soteria at Work and our deconstruction business, which is a job training workforce development program where men can come in and learn a skill in our wood shop. And once they get that, they either stay and work for us, or we send them out into the community. Most of them get jobs in the construction field or something like that. So we have a lot going on, you know, to help people get reacclimated back. Not only them, but their families as well. Because a lot of people will leave here and they'll want to get married, or they'll want to get back with their families. And we believe in family reintegration. So if somebody's married here, we try to, you know, have counseling for them and their spouse. If they're going back to their family and they want to come to a financial literacy class, we invite the family to learn what they're learning. Because the worst thing that we could do is teach somebody all these skills and they go back to their neighborhood and they're going to lose it all. Right. Take it. So
it's that reorientation. It takes a lot. And how many people can you service at a time?
So our transitional house, we can serve 32 at one time.
32 at one time.
Yeah. But in the heyday, right before the pandemic, we had walk-ins, and we were doing about 250 people a year. We also do expungements. With the H3209 expungement bill in 2018, the legislation set up that each county was supposed to set up their own fund to pay for half of an expungement. But guess what? It never happened. You're supposed to go to the solicitor's office and they would have a fund, but they didn't. So we set up our own fund in our office where people donate money to an expungement fund. And so sometimes we pay the whole fee, but the majority of the time we pay for half of the expungement. It costs $310 to get an expungement. Most people have 2 or 3 charges. So, just imagine you got a criminal background, you can't get a good job, and you're having to come up with $900 or $1,000 to pay for an expungement. So we pay for half of that. And we started that a few years ago. And we every year at Second Chance Month, we have an expungement clinic. We just had one this past Second Chance Month where we had a record examination. We had attorneys here in our office. We invited the public to come in and to see if people could get an expungement. And if they could, we would pay 50% of that.
That takes a huge collaborative effort from community. And have you faced difficulty when it comes to cooperation, or has it gotten easier over the years? Do you feel like?
Well, over the years, it has gotten easier. Mm-hmm. Being in this work for 24 years, just people just get to know you. It's like the golden arches, kids who can't even read, McDonald's. But people are, I'm thankful because the early days, it was tough for us. It was very tough. We didn't have any money. And that's why I became a community development corporation, because there was no funding for prison aftercare. Then it turned into reentry. There was no funding. And so the only thing that I saw that could help us was CDC, it's Community Development Corporation, which, HUD was doing it, giving money for low-income housing. And so I saw that avenue. So things are getting better. The city, the county, very supportive of us. Our state legislators, some of them, support what we do. I've testified on Congress a couple of times for some bills, things like that. So people are seeing that, things like that. So people are seeing that, we pay now or pay later. And so I think we need to go ahead and pay now.
Mm-hmm. That's right. What is, a very prevalent theme throughout your whole story is, and since you've been released for the past 24 years, has been you are really all about social impact. And that's what Soteria is also about. Mm-hmm. And speaking of impact, when I think about impact, you have a TEDx Greenville talk.
Yes.
You have Reclaim, you're an author. You've also been honored alongside the former governor of South Carolina and Secretary of Education, former Secretary of Education, Governor Richard Riley.
Yes.
What does it feel like, and he's like 90 years old. Mm-hmm. You're nowhere near that. So, but what does it feel like having your impact measured alongside somebody, in that moment, you must realize that your impact is also national, is also reaching places. What does it feel like now, whereas 20 some years ago, that wasn't the case?
Well, I was taken back when I found out that I was receiving the Spirit Award from United Way alongside, Richard Riley. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I got to the stage and came down, I shook his hand. That's right. And I said, it is an honor to be recognized alongside you for all the things you've done, and not only in the state, but nationally. And I'm just so thankful for all the hard work, because at one time I was overlooked and under-resourced, and no one would look at me. And now I'm sitting here beside our former governor, being recognized. So that was a really big day for me. He's a great guy, very nice guy. And he shook my hand, and after he heard me speak, he was like, that was very good. And I'm honored to be beside you. So I was very thankful for that. Mm-hmm. That was a great day.
What is one thing that you want people to know about, I don't know, redemption, the Word of God, incarcerated people, your story? What is that impression you want people to be left with?
I'll say this, that none of us should be recognized for the worst thing that we've ever done. We all have potential. We're flawed people. And, we just need to be looked at as human beings. Yeah. And we need to sit down with one another and have a conversation like we're having. now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we judge people by what they look like or where they come from. And, not by who they are. And I think, that's what we need to do. That's what I do.
Right.
It's too easy.
I love it. I can tell that both are true about you. You love the Lord and you love his people. So I'm very grateful for your impact and for your witness. And, it means a lot. Commission for Minority Affairs, we want to amplify the work and stories of people like you. So thank you for, just being, enduring. This is a love journey, a love walk, I'm sure, and a love endeavor, but we really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us on the Culture Connect today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Did you enjoy the episode? I hope you did. Be sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and connect with us on all digital platforms so you don't miss the next episode of the Culture Connect. We'll see you next time, everybody.